A warning. This episode includes discussions about suicide, depression, and anxiety. If you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide or is in emotional distress, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255 or visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. This is The Other 51. I'm Brian, and this week my guest is ESPN MLB Insider Jeff Passan. My guest this week is an ESPN MLB Insider, writer of one of the best feature pieces I've read in a very long time. But more importantly, he is a fellow former Buffalo News summer intern. Jeff Passan, welcome to The Other 51.
Listen, there's a very select group of us and a very proud group of us. And as somebody who truly appreciated the Buffalo News internship, because I was only 19 years old at the time and I could go over the border to legally drink, it was about as good of an internship as you could possibly have.
That is the magic age for when you're in college in Western New York, when you hit 19.
That's exactly right. I spent far too many days toiling late night in Canada, dancing to DMX and with a Molson. No, it was more like I was more a Labatt Blue guy than a Molson guy. Actually.
That was the great split, whether you were a Labatt Blue or Molson Canadian at that time. So what do you interned there? Was it summer of 2000?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so can I talk about that internship a little bit and kind of why it was so valuable and kind of some of the experiences you had there that were formative for you as a journalist?
The beauty of the Buffalo News internship is it's almost anachronistic now, because about half the days I would be out reporting, and about half the days I was working a desk shift. And the notion of like a newspaper desk, it barely exists anymore. You see what's happened to newspapers and how they've just been slashed and burned, and how editing sometimes is outsourced to these giant conglomerates that have no resonance locally, no knowledge, nothing institutional there. And newspaper desks, so I've always been fond of them because my dad worked at a paper for 42 years.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, he was at the Plain Dealer and the sports department for 42 years and was a reporter for about half of them, but spent the back half of his career on the desk. So when I would go visit him at work occasionally, and he was working the night shift, I would see what it was like there. And newspaper desk people are my people. It's why when I got to ESPN and was introduced to, we have this universal news group, and the news desk is sort of the clearinghouse for all of our information that goes through. When you have breaking news, you call the news desk. And while we lost a number of these people in recent layoffs, we had hundreds, like literally hundreds of years of newspaper experience on the news desk. And the first time that I talked with some of these people, that I met with them, Ken Freitas, Len Lampanell, Nancy Cooney, Alita Whithoft, like these were my people, because I had spent those hours and those evenings with them at the Buffalo News and at other places. And so the formative, like the thing you learn putting out a newspaper on a daily basis, it's invaluable. I look at a lot of kids who are students these days who are coming up through digital only realms and see the lack of that daily newspaper grind that you learn. And I just listen, they're going to be fine. The kids are going to be all right. I just feel sorry that they don't get to experience that, because it was such a joy getting to do that every day.
I love desk people so much. I married one. My wife, who's actually on the other side of the computers here, was a copy editor in Binghamton where I worked, and that's where we met. And it was funny because I actually somehow was a copy editing intern when I was at the news in 1998.
Wow.
I didn't want to be a copy editor. I didn't apply. I applied to be with the editorial page because that's what I wanted to do at the time, was run an op-ed page. They didn't have interns there, so they stuck me on the copy desk for reasons I still don't know. I think somebody owed Lee Capola at Bonaventure a favor, and so they so I got it that way. But it was invaluable that you're right, the experience, the institutional knowledge of a guy like Milt Jaffe, who was the copy desk chief who I worked with, who had been there for God ever, and all that local knowledge that the editors would bring and that you would learn, and kind of seeing a story work through.
Did you know Milt in sports?
Yeah, I know him in passing. Like, I've met him a few times throughout my career, but I didn't know him very well.
One of my favorite things was Milt. It was almost like clockwork. Every night, his computer would just do something that pissed him off, and it was right around deadline, and Milt would just be sitting there grumbling at his computer. I think he punched it a couple of times. He would start swearing. Like, it's the veterans on the desk who make the desk great, right? And there were a ton of, Howard Smith was a sports editor, and then Lisa Wilson, who's now at the Athletic, was an assistant. Flick Doyle was there. Yeah. I mean, there were just I know I'm talking about people nobody knows, but that's an important thing. The way that sports sections and the way that sports pages get put together are not the reporters,
right,
and not the writers. They're the behind the scenes people who never do get the credit. And those are the people who are the lifeblood of this industry. And as time has gone on, they've gotten less and less respect, and I think the work suffers for it, unfortunately, because of that. They are the firewall to everything we do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's funny, Lisa Wilson was actually started at the news on the news copy desk while I was an intern, so I got to know her right away. And of course, she's amazing and awesome, and one of the best sports editors in the country. It should be said too, it should be pointed out, that when we were news interns, and they've discontinued the program since then, it was paid. And it was paid really, really well. I know that's been kind of in the sports media world, Twitter discussions this week as we're recording this.
I got to be honest, all of my internships, I had internships all 4 years in college, and all of my internships were paid.
Oh, that's great.
All internships, I was at Baseball Weekly. I think I got $350 a week after my freshman year. I think the news paid $400.
I think that's what that rings a bell. Yeah.
I was at the Star Ledger, and I think it was $500, and the Washington Post was just like, I think we got like $700 a week. And this was back in 2000, summer of 2002. So
right.
That was a lot of money back then. I don't think I made that much money in my first job.
I can guarantee you I didn't make that much my first 5 years at my jobs. So I did want to kind of do a deep dive in the feature you wrote about Drew Robinson that published earlier this year on ESPN.com. Just a fantastic piece. As I told you before I hit record, one of my students in my sports writing class called it the best piece of sports writing he can remember reading. And I'm actually having them read it as part of the feature writing unit that we're doing next week because I thought it was so good. So I wanted to do a little deep dive into how that piece came about and writing and reporting it. But just kind of speaking in general, since that piece came out, what was the reaction to that piece?
I thought that it was going to be good, right? Because it's, you come across how many stories like this in your career. As I was sitting down to write it, I was thinking to myself, you're never going to write a better story than this. Like there's just, there's some that come along and, they're going to be great. Even if you do screw it up, even if I miss, I can't miss. And it was interesting because that morning, I posted the story on Twitter, and I try not to let social media drive my thoughts on a piece. I try not to get emotionally tied up in it. You want the reaction to be instantaneous and overwhelming. And I've learned if it's not, sometimes it takes a slow burn for this to happen. And especially if the story is like 11,000 or 12,000 words.
Right.
And so as time went on during the day, and I think people finally got a chance to start reading it and get all the way through, I was worried for sure, because it was such a sensitive subject.
Mm-hmm.
And because reporting on suicide and attempted suicide is such an incredibly difficult and tricky thing to do, that it might, there might be some blowback against it. There wasn't. And I'm thankful for the steps that we took and the process that we put in place to make sure that we did this the right way. And by the end of the day, the hundreds of DMs that I had, because my DMs that are open, and the thousands upon thousands of replies, and watching Drew's following grow from like a couple hundred people to thousands and thousands because they're seeing his story. That day, the days after, and in the weeks since have been really gratifying, because when you do a story that's going to have an impact on people's lives, there's nothing better you can do.
I want to back up a little bit. There's a lot I want to get to on this, but and what you just said. But let's back up. How did you kind of get connected with this story to begin with?
It was through a source who I've known for probably about a decade now, and he knew Drew, and he knew what had happened, and told me about it back in May of 2020.
Okay.
And he didn't use a name or anything like that. He said a big league player shot himself and survived. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. And he's talking about how he might want to talk, but give it a little while. I was like, yeah, we definitely should give it a little while. So I heard back from him in August, and he said he's ready to talk. And my first instinct was, this just happened a few months ago. Is it the right thing for him to talk? Is when I was younger, the story mattered most to me. It's like, if something was happening and I could write about it, I wanted to write about it.
Sure.
And I don't think it came from a bad place, a selfish place, a place where I was trying to advance my career or anything like that. It was just kind of an instinct where, hey, I'm a journalist. If there's a story there, you go and do it. I don't know if it's because I've had kids, because I've matured, because I've gotten older. Especially with something like this, the person comes before the story for me.
Right.
And if that makes me a bad journalist, then that is something that I'm perfectly okay with, because I am a human being before I am a reporter, a writer, and anything like that. And if my first instinct says, I don't want this person to suffer on account of a story that I'm doing, I don't want to put myself and what I'm trying to achieve here before his well-being and health. Well, that's the approach I took. So I reached out to suicide experts, and I said to them, what is the potential harm in even talking with this person about this subject? And we walked through a few things, and I asked him, what kinds of questions should I be asking him, and what sorts of answers should I be looking for as potential red flags? And so it's almost like, even before I had thought to do the story, I wanted to make sure that it was the right story to do and that it was the right time. And, Drew wanted to FaceTime the first time we talked. I think he wanted to see how I reacted when I saw his face. Okay. Because, he's missing an eye. And it's when you see him for the first time, and you don't know what to be expecting, it's like, whoa, what happened there? And I tried to play it off cool, and I asked him those questions, and everything he was saying, it sounded right. And later on during the reporting process, I would make sure to talk not just with people around him, but with, doctors that he's working with, to make sure that this is something that's right for him. Because I would tell him, this is the potential fallout. These are the potential negatives. Because again, with something as sensitive as this, as close to the incident, the thing that as a journalist you want to do is make sure that you're protecting the person whose story you're telling as much as you're looking to tell that story.
Right. Did you know Drew at all? Have you dealt with him at all before this?
Nope, never met him.
So what are those that you mentioned, that first conversation, and I'm wondering what it's like both in the actual interview, but just getting ready for it. Here's a baseball player you've never met, don't know, and you're calling him up to FaceTime with him about a suicide attempt, which is as emotional and as personal, as an intimate a moment possible, I can imagine. So what was that like, getting ready to do that, and that first conversation like?
The first conversation was very eye-opening because I wasn't sure how much he was going to be willing to talk about and how open he was going to be. And then within like the first 5 minutes, he pulls out this reflection that he wrote that essentially goes over what happened on April 16th, 2020 in incredible detail. And by the end of that, I'm just sitting there, slack-jawed. I just completely taken aback. And I it's not that I don't know what to say. I said to him, that's unbelievable. And he's like, I know. And that's why I'm here. That's my purpose. That's what I want to do. That's why I need you.
Okay. And
I got off the phone with him. We talked for about a half hour. I got off the phone with him and I called up Andy Tennant, who runs E60. And I'm like, have I got a fucking story for you? and remember, we weren't traveling much,
right,
if at all. So getting travel done during the pandemic was going to be a hard thing, but we couldn't not do this in person.
Right.
And it was clear Drew was going to be open and wanted to be open. But I don't think it was until we were in Vegas and sat down with him that we really understood just how much we were going to get. And I have to give all the credit in the world to Martin Kodabashian, who directed Alive, the documentary that accompanied the written story, because Martin has this amazing ability to make people feel comfortable. Drew and I could always speak a very similar language. We'd been in baseball for, he'd been playing since he was, 7 years old. I'd been reporting essentially that time, from the time Drew was 7 to about now. And so we share, people in the game who we know, we share common interests. Like, we just have that thing. Martin's not a huge baseball guy, but Martin gets people, and the comfort that Martin gave in this setting that could have been extremely difficult, with us just sitting down and talking for, and I'm not exaggerating here, 7 hours. It was a 7-hour interview. Wow. And to do that, at the end of that day, I was like, it was the most emotionally wiped I've ever been doing something in journalism. Like, just the heaviness of that topic and talking about it with him for that long. I mean, like, it was something.
How many interviews and how many times did you talk to Drew in doing the story? You have the big interview, like you said, the 7-hour one, but how often and how many interviews did you do throughout the whole process?
We talked for the big one. We texted all the time.
Okay.
And we texted all the time just because we were trying to figure out when the damn thing was going to run, and it just kept getting pushed back. So he was getting frustrated, and we were having to manage that. Understandably, by the way, we were having to manage that frustration. And we were putting the story together and getting the film done. And so there was that. In terms of follow-up, like formal interviews, I mean, there were so many things, like so many questions. He was like the most responsive source you can ever have. If I had a question when I was writing just on a small detail, I would usually save up 3 or 4 of them and just hit him at once, so I didn't keep pestering him. But follow-up interviews, there were 3 of them probably that I used. On one that was kind of halfway between the first time we talked and when the story was published. One after he had sort of his, he had a really tough moment, fell into a pretty bad depression there. And one just a little bit before the story ran, just to get like the latest, okay, this is about to go, where are we in all of these different places?
And one of the scenes in the story that stuck with me since reading it, and I went back and read it, and it still strikes me reading it today, is when you talk to Drew's family, and they came to the house to clean up after he had been admitted to the hospital, and just sticking. I mean, talk about details that's sticking with you. So you're interviewing Drew, and he's very open and wants to tell the story. What about his family and approaching them about this moment? That's as painful for them as it is for anybody, maybe more so. So what was that reporting process and approaching process like?
Another part of the reason that Drew is like the greatest subject for a story you can possibly imagine is because his family saw how important this was to him and felt like they needed to embrace it every bit as much as he did. If his message to people is that we need to talk in order for things to be better, right? His family needed to practice what he was preaching. And they felt like they owed that to him. And I don't think they understood the involvement that they were going to have in this. But I think when it's all said and done, they were appreciative of it and happy to have done it, because it probably brought something out in them that they didn't see or know or recognize or want to plumb. And I'm thankful that Drew asked them to do this, because you might have had reticence otherwise. This is a really hard subject to talk about. Daryl Robinson, Drew's dad, does not cry. He was a mess during our interview.
Imagine, yeah.
And one of the hard parts was we had 2 days in Vegas, and we got Daryl, we got Chad, his brother, we got Diana, the best friend, longtime girlfriend, and we got Drew. We did not get Brittany, his sister, or his mother. And let me tell you, having to do those interviews over Zoom was really, really hard. I mean, you're like, we got a suite in a hotel and set that up, and they came to the hotel, and like having to ask a mom about her son trying to kill himself over Zoom sucks.
Yeah,
it sucks. But they were so open and embracing of what we were trying to do. And I don't think they understood what the scope of it was going to be. I don't think we understood at the beginning what the scope of it was going to be. Like, right. we don't do 60-minute documentaries typically. Mm-hmm. And we don't run, stories that are over 10,000 words. And so the support that we had to tell this story from all the layers of people at ESPN, whether it's people in the storytelling unit, whether it's on the E60 side, whether it's the leftovers from the late lamented magazine, whether it's the group that, we have a group of people who look at stories with sensitive subjects and really pour over what the details are to make sure that we're telling these types of stories the way that they should be told. It was top to bottom a great effort. And as difficult as an experience like this can be, and as emotional as you can get, and as angry as you are that the story's not out yet, got to tell Drew that we're waiting another week, another month. And as much as there's managing that, I think when it was all said and done and the story was printed and the film came out, everyone looked at it and thought this is a pretty monumental achievement by all of us and something that we're going to be proud of for the rest of our careers.
Yeah, the detail that haunts me from that story is his dad saying, "No, we're cleaning this up ourselves." When his sister's
and by the way, let me. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
We took so many details out from that scene. I mean, so many details out from that scene. So many details out from, the scenes, the sort of interludes where we were cutting back to those 20 hours between April 16th and 17th. The original draft of the story was about 14,000 words and included everything.
Okay.
And I just put everything in there because, you want to empty your notebook as much as makes sense. And I sent the story to Dan Reidenberg, who wrote the reporter's like the guide to suicide reporting, essentially. He's literally like the guy who wrote it. And he wrote back and said, this is not going to work.
Okay.
and he said, there are way too many details. And as a reporter, that's a counterintuitive thing to hear.
Right.
Details are the lifeblood of what we do. But in the case of suicide reporting, details are the sorts of things that they worry can create copycats.
Okay.
And so Rachel Ulrich, who's an absolutely phenomenal editor, she tends to work on most of my longer feature type stories, did the Fernando Tatis story with me and is going to be doing another cover story with me coming up. She and I talked about this and about how we would approach it. And really what we came to was the idea that unless a detail ties back to, explicitly ties to the narrative of the story, then we need to consider it gratuitous and get rid of it.
Okay.
And I think that's why the story wound up being as embraced as much as it was by a community that can be very skeptical toward reporters and toward the telling of suicides and attempted suicides, because we really tried to take great care in doing this the right way while still honoring the story that Drew had to tell.
Right. You mentioned that long interview, and just in reporting this and then in writing it, I mean, how did you manage your own mental health as you're dealing with these weighty topics?
I hope this doesn't come off wrong at all. I'm extremely lucky. I tend to be a very mentally well-balanced person, and I don't get too high. I don't get too low. I kind of just live in the middle. And it allows me to tell stories like this without getting too emotionally. It's not that I'm not emotionally invested. I'm very invested in the person, but in the story, I can sit there and separate it. And it was almost like I knew the material so well by the time that I sat down to write it. I had a general idea of where I wanted it to go. And there were so many incredible scenes there that I just found the scenes that I knew. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. There were scenes in there that if I had one of them in another story, I would feel like would make that story. And there were like 10 of them in this story. Mm-hmm. So it was almost like, I know I have the goods. If I allow myself to get emotionally wrecked by this, I'm not going to be able to deliver the story that Drew deserves because he told it. Thus, get your shit together, Passan, and keep it together. Because if you don't, then you're doing wrong by him.
I was wanting to ask about writing it too, because we've talked about reporting on it, but you sit down to write this, and like you said, the material you have is just overwhelming, not just from a a mental standpoint, just a journalistic standpoint. So how do you piece all that together, and how do you kind of get to a draft and then to a story? What was the process of actually piecing the story together?
Before I started writing, we needed to figure out, like, I knew very clearly this was like a 2-act story. It was essentially everything before he fired the shot and everything after he fired the shot. And it was a matter of trying to figure out how to tell the before in the most compelling way possible. Going to interlace those two things. And it worked-ish.
Okay.
It just didn't work. And in that, I filed the first draft like that. The second draft or the second half of the story, rather, was mainly chronological. Not entirely, but pretty much chronological. And listen, sometimes when you have something that's this good, don't complicate it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get in the way. There are people out there who are talented enough to take a story like this, bring it out of chronology, and make it incredible. I don't think that's me. Maybe at some point in my life I will be. I've gotten much better at structuring as I've gotten older, as I've done a book and stuff like that. I've gotten more confident in doing that, but that's always been like my weakness, especially in telling long stories. I have no questions about my reporting. I have no questions about my writing or phrase turning or anything like that. I feel confident after 20 years I can do those things pretty well. It's just, am I telling the story in the most compelling fashion possible? And narrative, in a lot of ways, I feel like it's turned into an ugly word, and has been almost co-opted. Like, oh, this is the narrative of a story that you're trying. No, narrative is just the right way to tell a story.
Right.
And there are people, Eli Saslow is a good friend of mine from. Yeah, I mean, he's a friend from college. We worked together at the Daily Orange at Syracuse. He gets narrative better than anyone, and I'm constantly jealous of the way that he puts stories together and wish that my brain could work like his. But I've gotten closer, and as we went over this story, one thing Rachel does really well is she's good at structure. Like, she is strong where I am weak. And that's what makes us, I think, really work well together. And it took, I think, 3 drafts to get to where we wanted it to be. But in the end, she was helping out on it. And we had input from Eric Neal, who's a phenomenal line editor as well. And Scott Burton took a look at it, and Greg Bishop, a close friend of mine, looked at it, and I trust his input. Ray Thompson, like, I just tried to, the story was important enough that I just went to the big guns and said, please, just, if this sucks anywhere, tell me, because I got only one shot at this.
Right. When you mentioned at the beginning, sitting down and kind of knowing you've got a great story. And I think, at some point, every writer's kind of been there. Every journalist has been there. So I'm wondering, as you're writing this, and you've been doing this for a long time, so I'm wondering if that frames your answer, but do you feel the weight, that enormity of, like, especially a story like this, like, I can't screw this up. This is as big as,
yes.
Okay. Or I was going to say, like, does it also kind of somehow weirdly relax you, like, I can't screw this up because the material is so good, I just got to step away? First one?
Both, in a weird way. It's like, I can't screw this up, but that doesn't mean that I can't do it to its fullest extent.
Sure.
It's like, I know this is going to be good. Good's not enough.
Right.
This warrants greatness.
Mm-hmm.
And it warrants me finding the best of myself in putting it together, and finding that place that maybe I didn't know that I had, or finding that ability, or digging down into some area of my psyche and soul that I didn't know. And I don't mean to sound mystical, but this is a mystical story.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is something that defies logic. And I am so deeply rooted in logic that the challenge to me was, how do you, I'm not a very religious person. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but this story has elements of that. And I can't let my own lack of that get in the way of that being part of the story. And so when I mean going to places that I don't know or that I don't dig into very much, it means opening yourself up to ideas that you may not fundamentally agree with, but are part of the story nevertheless, because they are what the subject thinks and believes.
Right. How did you find time to write this, along with like breaking every baseball story and, being a dad and a husband? How do you balance out that day-to-day work that you're normally doing for ESPN with this?
You just do.
Okay.
Here's the thing. I could have come to ESPN and just focused on news. And I think my bosses would have been perfectly happy with that. If I did news, if I did TV, I would have felt like I'm missing something, though. At my core, I am and always will be a writer. That is like what that's the foundational element of journalism for me. It is going out and telling great stories. And the other, like the news stuff, let's put it this way. I never would have gotten this story had I not been trying to dig into news, because I never would have met the person who connected us. I never would have forged the relationship with him that allowed him to go to Drew and say, hey, this guy is someone you can trust. That's where, I used to look at people who broke news and did transactional stuff from a very snobby, like writerly place. Like, right. Oh, I do real journalism. All you do is transactions that people are going to get 5 minutes later. Well, when you do the transactions, you meet more people. And when you meet more people, you get better stories to tell. Mm-hmm. And when you get better stories to tell, that's the whole fucking point of this, is it not?
Right.
Like that. And so there is a direct line in between news breaking and getting to tell this story. And if I weren't always having something sort of in the background that I can work on, like it's not going to be anything like Drew, but just a longer form story, and something that I can really tuck into and takes some brain power, takes some cleverness, takes sitting there and just staring at your screen for like an hour, whether it's one sentence, whether it's at a transition, whether it's while you're outlining, whether it's trying to figure out whether this quote fits here or there. It would feel empty.
Right.
And, maybe at some point I'll get to there and I'll be like, nah, that's too tough. Like, I've done this long enough.
Right.
I hope not, though.
Yeah.
I hope not, because I got into this business to tell stories, and it's still my favorite part of it.
Yeah, when I started covering baseball, like, oh God, 15 years ago now, because I'm old, Joel Sherman gave me advice, the great New York Post columnist and baseball writer. He gave me advice that he always tried to get something new in the paper every day, just at least one thing. And because that search is what gets you, but you get good stories by always looking out for that one thing, whether it's a trade rumor, an injury update, just that small incremental stuff builds. And, like you said, it's the building of relationships and always having your antenna up. So I ask everybody this that I have on my podcast. So I'll ask you, what's the best thing that you've read lately?
Okay. I need to hold on a second. You know what happens? You say what happens? How do you have time for all of this? It's because my mind stops working and I forget things. And I'm looking at, I have a bunch of tabs open, and there was a story that I read and I'm blanking on it right now. This is embarrassing. Something should jump straight to the forefront. I did enjoy, not to companies stuff, I did enjoy Seth Wickersham and Don Van Natta's D. Smith story. Right. And there was an Adrian LaFrance story in the Atlantic about Facebook and it being a doomsday machine. And I very much enjoyed that. There was, hold on, I have another. There was something on in Wired on tactical like special ops people who turn into like tactical training.
Okay.
Open tactical training facilities, and it's like at the, it's at the heart of the scary January 6th stuff. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed reading about David Brooks's conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was at BuzzFeed.
Yep.
Those are some of the ones of late, but I apologize for not having something at the absolute top of my head, because my brain is clearly filled with muck.
Well, I can give along with, I'm not going to say your piece, because that doesn't sound super, and it sounds kind of disingenuous, even though it was one of the best things I've read lately. But I just finished Wright Thompson's book last night, Pappyland, the book he wrote about bourbon and his family and the family of Kentucky. And Wright's as good. You said Wright's as good as it gets, and you get a writer like that on a subject that like that. I mean, that's that perfect marriage where it's just hits you every
right. And alcohol, never. I would never have anticipated that.
I've been told. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Like Wright and Wright helped me get my first baseball writing job.
Really?
Yeah. I was in Fresno. It was my first job out of college covering Fresno State basketball. And Dick Cagle went to MLB.com. Dick, of course, is going to be, he won the Spink Award this year, going to be going into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
And so Dick goes to MLB.com, and Bob Dutton switches over from the national beat to the Royals beat, and they have a national baseball writing job open in Kansas City, where Wright had been hired a few months earlier. And I met with Wright at it was an NCAA tournament regional in Phoenix, and he pushed for me to get that job, and I finished in second place. And the guy who they were going to offer the job to wanted an extra week of vacation and turned down the job because he did not get that extra week of vacation. And so they ended up offering it to me. And that's how I became a baseball writer.
That's awesome. All right, Jeff. So the link to the article will be in show notes, along with some resources that go along with that. Jeff, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure is mine, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Other 51. Show notes for this and all of our episodes can be found at sportsmediaguide.com by clicking on the Other 51 tab. If you like the show, please consider giving it a rating and a review, either at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help people find the show. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.